I don't really remember anything about the Beatle days. Uh, it seems like a sort of, previous incarnation when I think about it.
George Harrison, the quiet Beatle known for his calm spirit and musical genius, carried deep feelings that often went unseen by the public. But behind the fame and iconic songs, there was one person he truly despised more than anyone else. A resentment so strong it left an undeniable mark on his life and career. Fans have long speculated about George's private battles, but the truth is more revealing than imagined. So who was this individual, and why did George's hatred burn so intensely? The answer is startling. George Harrison. While Lennon and McCartney's creative tug-of-war is legendary, George Harrison's own battles were quieter, yet no less fierce. To many, he was the quiet Beatle, the calm guitarist who appeared content in the shadows. But behind the calm exterior, frustration simmered. Harrison wanted space for his songs, his voice, his vision. Yet John and Paul constantly overshadowed him. His struggle for recognition, often overlooked, was a defining thread in his life long before the Beatles became a global phenomenon. Music, more than anything else, became his escape. At Liverpool Institute High School for Boys, George felt boxed in by rigid lessons and teachers who dismissed his passions. Even the school's music program disappointed him. It offered no guitars, the very instrument he adored. Instead, he would sketch them in the margins of his notebooks, certain that this was the path meant for him. The obsession deepened in 1956 when, pedaling home one day, he caught the sound of Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel echoing from a nearby house. That moment lit a fire in him. George absorbed influences from Skiffle, Django Reinhardt, and Slim Whitman before his mother bought him a cheap guitar. Guided by a family friend, he learned simple tunes, then formed a skiffle band, the Rebels, with his brother Peter and Arthur Kelly. It was around this same time that fate placed him on a school bus with Paul McCartney. Their conversations, always circling back to music, marked the start of a friendship and collaboration that would eventually reshape popular culture. Yet the roots of George's artistry stretched back even further, into a household filled with modest means but surprising musical influence. George Harrison was born on the 25th of February 1943 in a small terraced home at 12 Arnold Grove, Liverpool. His father, Harold, worked as a bus conductor, while his mother, Louise, brought warmth and song into their modest surroundings. Louise, in particular, carried an unusual musical spirit. She sang with such force that neighbors recalled her voice rattling the windows, and during her pregnancy, she often tuned in to Radio India, enchanted by the mystical sounds of sitars and tablas. It was as though, before George even drew his first breath, the seeds of his lifelong fascination with Eastern music and spirituality had already been planted. By the late 1940s, the Harrison family had relocated to Upton Green in Speke. Life remained simple, an outdoor toilet, a coal fire for heat. But George's imagination had already outgrown those walls. The boy who doodled guitars and cycled through Liverpool with melodies in his head was on the brink of a journey that would one day carry him far from home, into the heart of one of the most famous bands the world has ever known. But here's the mystery. How did a quiet teenager from Speke, doodling guitars in his school books, manage to force his way into the orbit of Lennon and McCartney? Stay with us to see how fate intervened. The rise of the quiet Beatle. George Harrison's path into the Beatles wasn't straightforward. In the spring of 1958, still just 15, he found himself auditioning for John Lennon and Paul McCartney's skiffle group, the Quarrymen. Lennon dismissed him at first as too young, but Paul insisted they give him another shot. On a late-night bus ride, George pulled out his guitar and nailed the solo to Bill Justice's Raunchy, leaving Lennon impressed enough to let him in. That moment sealed his place among the boys who would later change music forever. Though his father urged him to finish school and continue his training as an electrician, George had already chosen music. By 16, he was more comfortable on stage than in a classroom, and the gigs in Liverpool soon carried him further. In 1960, the group headed to Hamburg under Alan Williams's management, where they played long nights in clubs like the Indra and Kaiserkeller. Those exhausting shows sharpened their sound and gave George the discipline to become a commanding guitarist. Still, being underage caught up with him, and German authorities deported him before the others returned. The turning point came in late 1961 when Brian Epstein became their manager. He reshaped their rough edges into a polished act that quickly caught the eye of EMI. Soon, their first single, Love Me Do, in 1962, reached the charts, and George began proving himself as more than just a supporting player. On Please Please Me, he sang lead on Do You Want to Know a Secret, and by With the Beatles in 1963, he earned his first writing credit with Don't Bother Me, showing his ambitions as a songwriter. George's hunger for new sounds set him apart. By 1965, Rubber Soul revealed his pull toward folk rock, but it was the sitar on Norwegian Wood that stunned critics and fans. Unlike a passing trend, his interest in Indian culture shaped his artistry. By Revolver in 1966, his songwriting was sharper and bolder. Taxman delivered biting commentary, while Love You Too carried Eastern influence. Even his tambura in Lennon's Tomorrow Never Knows pushed the Beatles into unexplored musical territory. This spirit of exploration carried into Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in 1967, where George's Within You Without You revealed both his musical and spiritual journey. Layered with sitar, tambura, and lyrics drawn from Eastern philosophy, it stood out as a deeply personal statement on an album that defined its era. As George's creativity expanded, tensions with Lennon and McCartney deepened. During the White Album sessions in 1968, he brought in Eric Clapton for While My Guitar Gently Weeps to secure its respect. By early 1969, frustration peaked at Twickenham Studios during Let It Be, where George briefly walked away, worn down by years of being sidelined. But with all the conflict swirling, one question lingers. Was George's quiet exit a temporary crack in the Beatles' unity, or the first real sign that the band was falling apart? Stay tuned to find out. George Harrison's defining moment. In January 1969, George Harrison reached a breaking point. He quietly walked out of the Beatles, weary of the endless disputes that shadowed their sessions. Yet just 12 days later, he returned, persuaded by an agreement to shift the troubled film project to Apple Studios and drop Paul McCartney's push for a live concert comeback. The decision smoothed tensions only slightly, but it gave Harrison space to step forward with some of his strongest work. That same year, during the creation of Abbey Road, George finally emerged from Lennon and McCartney's towering partnership. He delivered two of the album's most celebrated songs, Here Comes the Sun and Something. The latter, released as a double A-side with Come Together, was a landmark achievement. It was his first A-side single, and it topped charts across the United States, Canada, Australia, and beyond. Frank Sinatra would later call it the greatest love song of the past 50 years, while John Lennon himself admitted it was the best track on the album. Even with these triumphs, George's frustrations deepened. His songs were often limited to just 2 or 3 per record, despite having built up a treasure trove of unreleased material. By May 1970, For You Blue, paired with McCartney's The Long and Winding Road, gave him another chart topper in America. But the imbalance of creative control was undeniable. On January 4, 1970, George joined Paul and Ringo for his final Beatles recording session, adding overdubs to Let It Be, a quiet close to a turbulent chapter. But how could George write timeless hits, yet still fight to be heard in his own band? Stay tuned to uncover the truth. George Harrison and Paul McCartney. George Harrison and Paul McCartney's story was never a simple tale of friendship or rivalry. It was both. They first crossed paths as schoolboys on a bus, guitars in hand, teaching each other chords and dreaming about music that would someday echo far beyond Liverpool. McCartney often described George as his baby brother, a bond that suggested closeness, even family. But as the Beatles rose to unimaginable heights, that same bond became tangled in creative clashes, bruised egos, and an unspoken struggle for recognition. Their relationship was strained by clashing personalities and ambitions. McCartney, meticulous and driven, often dominated studio sessions with his perfectionism, shaping the Beatles' polished sound. Harrison, more contemplative, craved space for his own ideas. Though he admired Paul's bass skills, he resented his controlling streak. In a 1974 interview, Harrison admitted he'd prefer session bassist Willie Weeks over Paul, even saying he could join a band with John Lennon but not McCartney, a sharp reflection of their deep creative friction. The seeds of that friction had been sown years earlier. During the creation of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in 1967, McCartney's vision dominated, pushing the Beatles into groundbreaking territory but leaving Harrison's own contributions in the shadows. His songs were limited, sometimes dismissed, even as he quietly stockpiled material that rivaled the work of Lennon and McCartney. When Abbey Road arrived in 1969, Harrison finally broke through with Here Comes the Sun and Something, both of which stood alongside the band's greatest achievements. Lennon himself called Something the album's best track, while Sinatra hailed it as one of the greatest love songs ever written. Yet Harrison's triumph also exposed the imbalance, the fact that he had been fighting uphill for recognition all along. That struggle played out vividly in their exchanges. McCartney once admitted to Lennon that, until recently, our songs have been better than George's, but now his were at least as good. Harrison dismissed the idea of sudden improvement, pointing out that many of his songs had been written years earlier but simply overlooked. He was no longer interested in waiting for approval. As he put it bluntly, he would just write and record whether others liked it or not. That independence marked a turning point, and it often put him at odds with Paul's need for control. Studio sessions sometimes magnified the worst of their differences. The recording of McCartney's Maxwell's Silver Hammer in 1969 became an infamous example. Harrison later called the song "So Fruity," mocking how Paul pushed the band relentlessly to perfect it while showing little enthusiasm when it came to Harrison's own material. The imbalance wasn't just about how many songs made it onto each record, it was about respect. Harrison felt his work was often treated as secondary, and Paul's relentless pursuit of his own ideas only deepened the sting. Even years later, the wounds hadn't fully healed. In a BBC interview, Harrison claimed Paul had ruined me as a guitar player, an exasperated remark that captured how diminished he sometimes felt in McCartney's shadow. Yet in the same breath, he admitted something deeper, that no matter the conflicts, there was always a thread tying them together. Their shared history was too powerful to be erased, even if it was often clouded by tension. The tension lingered long after the Beatles' breakup. In 1994, Harrison joined McCartney and Ringo Starr to work on Lennon's unfinished demos. The collaboration was playful at times, but it also revived old frustrations. Both George and Paul admitted they could still get on each other's nerves, proof that the old dynamic had never entirely faded. Observers noted that their relationship remained volatile even into Harrison's final years. Yet over time, a quiet acceptance began to take root. In 2001, when asked in an online chat whether Paul annoyed him, Harrison quoted a Victorian proverb, "Scan not a friend with a microscopic glass. You know his faults. Then let his foibles pass." It was a gentle admission that, despite decades of friction, he had come to see Paul less as a rival and more as an imperfect friend. Their bond was never clean, never simple. It was woven from love, rivalry, admiration, and resentment, an unbreakable tie between two men who could never fully live with or without each other. But did those years of rivalry truly soften into friendship between George and Paul, or was something left unspoken? Keep watching to find out. George Harrison's final days. Harrison's battle with cancer had stretched across years, first with a throat diagnosis in 1998, followed by treatment for lung cancer and later a brain tumor in 2001. In those final weeks, McCartney visited him at a clinic just outside New York. Paul later described the moment as strangely dreamlike. The two of them laughing about silly things, slipping into the kind of easy banter they had shared as teenagers. For a brief time, all the noise of fame, arguments, and rivalry disappeared, McCartney remembered sitting by George's side, holding his hand, something he said they would never have done in their Liverpool youth. "It was lovely," he reflected, his voice breaking years later, "like being with my baby brother again." On November 29, 2001, George Harrison passed away at the age of 58. The next day, McCartney stood before reporters, visibly shaken, and described his old friend as a lovely guy, very brave, with a wonderful sense of humor. No matter the battles they had fought in studios or on tour, in that moment, Paul's words carried nothing but affection. Their children carried that spirit of reconciliation forward. Stella McCartney, born in 1971, and Donnie Harrison, born in 1978, grew up in the shadows of extraordinary fathers but found comfort and connection in each other. When Martin Scorsese released Living in the Material World, Stella spoke of being deeply moved as Donnie read his father's words aloud, saying it felt like George was speaking directly through his son. That bond deepened over the years in ways both personal and public. Stella designed the wedding gown for Donnie's bride, Solveig Karadottir, in 2012, a gesture of friendship that went beyond their family legacies. 2 years later, Donnie returned the kindness by surprising Stella during a gala performance with his father's iconic Live and Let Die, turning a rock anthem into a tribute that stitched their families even closer together. In them, the echoes of Harrison and McCartney's bond live on, sometimes complicated, often tender, but always tied to the music that defined an era. Stella and Donnie's friendship stands as proof that even when the past is layered with conflict, the next generation can carry forward something gentler, respect, affection, and a shared reverence for what their fathers built together. But just as his music carried an air of mystery and longing, George Harrison's private life often unfolded with the same mix of beauty, turbulence, and passion. But behind the music and family bonds, one mystery lingers. Was George's search for love ever as harmonious as the songs he wrote? Stay with us to see what unfolded. Matters of the Heart. Before the world ever saw him as the quiet Beatle, a chance encounter on the set of A Hard Day's Night in 1964 changed everything. Pattie Boyd, then a 19-year-old model cast as a schoolgirl in the film, caught Harrison's eye immediately. In his typically disarming way, he turned a casual lunch break into a bold proposal, and within 2 years, on January 21, 1966, they were married. Paul McCartney standing at his side as best man. Their union seemed charmed at first, but fame, temptation, and personal demons soon cast shadows. Boyd later spoke of the final years as being riddled with strain. Harrison's infidelity weighed heavily, and substance abuse, particularly coke, altered his once gentle spirit. "It froze his emotions," she said, describing how distance crept into their marriage. The ultimate breaking point came when Boyd discovered his affair with Maureen Starkey, Ringo Starr's wife, a betrayal she called the final straw. Their separation in 1974 and eventual divorce in 1977 left deep scars, but also paved the way for Boyd's next chapter, when she moved in with Eric Clapton and later married him in 1979. For Harrison, renewal came not long after. On September 2, 1978, he wed Olivia Trinidad Arias, a former marketing executive who had worked with A&M Records and later his own Dark Horse label. Olivia offered stability and devotion, standing by him during his battles with illness and remaining a guardian of his legacy long after his death in 2001. Away from the stage and personal drama, Harrison also found joy in speed and precision. His fascination with racing dated back to the 1955 British Grand Prix at Aintree, where at only 12 years old, he was mesmerized by the roar of engines and the blur of cars, but also for indulging in the thrill of Formula One, a legacy etched in light and shadow. Flowing naturally from his personal life, George Harrison's story after the Beatles became one of honor, conflict, and remembrance. Even years after his passing in 2001, the world continued to recognize his influence. In 2004, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a solo artist, his traveling Wilburys bandmates Jeff Lynne and Tom Petty standing proudly at the ceremony. 2 years later, New York honored him again, placing his name on the Madison Square Garden Walk of Fame in tribute to his groundbreaking concert for Bangladesh in 1971, a charity performance that forever changed how music could serve humanity. By 2009, his star gleamed on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, where Paul McCartney joined Olivia and Donny Harrison, their words mingling with the Hare Krishna chant that evoked George's unshakable spirituality. Tributes didn't stop there. Martin Scorsese's 2011 documentary Living in the Material World peeled back layers of George's music, faith, and friendships, while the Recording Academy cemented his standing with a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2015. From murals in Liverpool to a bust in Bangladesh, statues and plaques worldwide carry his image, including the 2024 blue plaque unveiled at his childhood home in Wavertree. Yet behind the glowing accolades lingered shadows of a fractured bond. Though fans often speculated about his rivalry with McCartney, it was John Lennon who stirred George's deepest wounds. Lennon's sharp tongue and dismissive attitude toward George's songwriting and spiritual pursuits left scars no award could heal. So what do you think truly fueled George Harrison and Paul McCartney's feud? Ego, rivalry, or something deeper? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.